Welcome to Listen English Story. Hello, my name is Georgia. I am a student of English, and I want to tell you about my life in London. I want to share my journey, how I learned to speak English naturally. When I first arrived here, I was shy. I knew some words, but I didn't know how to speak like other people. But I found a way to learn. Let me tell you my story. When I first arrived in London, it felt like stepping into a different world. The city was big, loud, and full of people who always seemed to be in a hurry. I had seen London in movies before, but standing in the middle of the Royal Opera House, surrounded by bright lights and hundreds of voices speaking all at once, was overwhelming. I clutched my suitcase tightly, feeling small among the towering buildings. I had dreamed about coming here for so long, but now that I was here, I felt lost. I had studied English in my home country, but it was not the same. In school, I learned grammar rules and vocabulary lists. I could write essays and pass tests, but speaking was different. When I heard people talking around me, I struggled to catch their words. They spoke fast, with different accents, and used phrases I had never seen in my textbooks. Even when I recognized words, I couldn't always understand their meaning together. It felt like everyone spoke a secret language that I wasn't a part of. I moved into a small apartment that I shared with another student. Her name was Mady, and she was from Singapore. She spoke some English, but not fluently. We both had the same problem. We were in London, surrounded by English, but we didn't know how to speak naturally. We helped each other when we could, but most of the time, we stayed quiet, afraid of making mistakes. One of my first challenges was going to the grocery store. I needed food, but I was nervous about talking to people. I walked into a small store near my apartment and picked up a few things: bread, eggs, milk. When I got to the cashier, she said something, but I didn't understand. I stared at her, feeling my face turn red. She repeated herself slower this time. "Do you need a bag?" I finally understood, but I was too nervous to answer. I just nodded. She smiled and handed me the bag, but I felt embarrassed. Why was it so hard to say one simple word? The next day, I decided to explore the city. I took the subway, but it was confusing. The announcements were in English, but they spoke too fast for me to understand. I watched other people trying to figure out what to do. I got on the train and hoped I was going in the right direction. At one stop, a man asked me, "Excuse me, do you know if this train goes to Westminster?" I panicked. I understood his words, but I didn't know how to respond. I had to find a way to use English in real life. I had to listen more, speak more, and stop being afraid of making mistakes. The next morning, I decided to challenge myself. I would go to a coffee shop and order something in English. It seemed like a small thing, but to me, it was a big step. I walked into a small cafe near my apartment. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air. The barista smiled at me and said, "Good morning. What can I get for you?" My heart started pounding. I had practiced this moment in my head. I took a deep breath and said, "Can I have a tea, please?" The barista nodded. "Sure. What kind of tea?" I had not prepared for this question. My mind went blank. I saw the menu, but the words didn't make sense to me. Instead of speaking, I just pointed at a name on the list. The barista looked and said, "Oh, green tea. Great choice." I nodded quickly. When I paid and took my tea, I felt both relief and disappointment. I had spoken, but I had not really had a conversation. As I walked out of the cafe, I thought about what had happened. I had taken a step forward, but I was still afraid to speak. I realized that my problem was not just the words. I was afraid of not being perfect. I didn't want to make mistakes, but if I stayed silent, I would never improve. I needed a new plan. I needed to learn how people really spoke in everyday life. I needed to listen to real conversations and understand how people talk naturally. And that is exactly what I decided to do next. After my small victory at the cafe, I knew I had to do more. Ordering tea was a start, but I still did not feel comfortable speaking. I had learned something important. I was not just struggling with English. I was struggling with confidence. I was afraid of making mistakes. I wanted to speak naturally, but I was too nervous. I needed a new way to learn. That night, I sat in my apartment thinking. I remembered something my English teacher back home once said. If you want to speak a language, you must listen to it first. That made sense. When babies learn to speak, they don't start with grammar rules. They listen to their parents. They hear words again and again until they understand them. Then one day they start speaking. I decided to try this. If I wanted to speak English naturally, I had to listen to how real people spoke. The next day, I went outside with a new plan. Instead of just walking through the city, I paid attention to conversations around me. I went to a park and sat on a bench. A woman was talking to her friend. She said, "Oh my gosh, I was so tired this morning. I needed my coffee." That sentence was simple, but I noticed something. She didn't say, "I was very tired." She said, "I was so tired." In school, I had learned very tired, but in real life, people said, "so tired." I took out my notebook and wrote it down. A few minutes later, a man walked by talking on his phone. He said, "I'll catch you later." That confused me. Catch what? Then I understood. He wasn't talking about catching something. He meant, "see you later." I smiled to myself. I had just learned another real-life phrase. I continued listening at the coffee shop, at the grocery store, on the subway. Everywhere, people were using simple but different words than what I had learned in school. I wrote down every new phrase I heard. My notebook started to fill up. After listening for a few days, I decided to take the next step. I had to start using these phrases myself. The first chance came at a grocery store. I was waiting in line when the cashier greeted me. "Hey, how's it going?" I had heard this before. It meant, "How are you?" Normally, I would say, "I am fine, thank you," because that's what I learned in school. But no one here talked like that. I wanted to sound natural, so I smiled and said, "I'm good. How about you?" The cashier nodded and said, "Good, thanks." Then she scanned my items. I felt proud. It was a small conversation, but I had spoken naturally. It felt different from before. I was not just using English, I was communicating. That moment changed everything. I realized I didn't have to be perfect. I just had to try. And with every small conversation, I became more confident. That was the beginning of my journey to speaking English naturally in London. One day, Jake asked, "Do you want to come to a game night this weekend? We play board games and just hang out." For a second, I wanted to say no. A whole night of speaking English? What if I embarrassed myself? But then I reminded myself that I was learning to speak without fear. So I smiled and said, "Yes, I'd love to." Game night was one of the best nights of my life. We played a game called Taboo, where you had to describe a word without saying it. At first, I was nervous, but then something amazing happened. I stopped thinking so much about grammar. I just spoke. At one point, I had to describe the word ocean. I said, "It is big blue water. A fish live here." Everyone laughed in a friendly way. "The ocean," someone shouted. I had done it. I had spoken English, and people understood me. That night, I realized I was no longer the same girl who was afraid to order tea at a cafe. I was speaking without fear. A few weeks later, I was walking to class when someone tapped my shoulder. I turned around and saw a girl looking nervous. "Hi, do you know where the library is?" she asked slowly, as if she was still learning English. I smiled. I knew exactly how she felt. I answered naturally, "Yes, it's just down that street. Turn right at the corner, and you'll see it." The girl smiled. "Thank you." As she walked away, I felt something powerful inside me. I had just helped someone in English. A few months ago, I was the one who was afraid to ask for directions. Now, I was the one giving them. I realized that I had not just learned English, I had become confident. And that was when I knew I had finally started speaking naturally. The moment I gave directions to that girl, something clicked in my mind. I had spoken without thinking. I didn't pause to translate words in my head. I didn't feel nervous. I just spoke. It was a small thing, but it felt huge. For the first time, I wondered, was I finally thinking in English? After that day, I started noticing little changes in my daily life. Small things I had never thought about before. One morning, I woke up to the sound of my alarm. As I reached for my phone, my first thought was, "Ugh, I need 5 more minutes." But the strange part? I had thought it in English. I sat up in bed, surprised. Usually, my first thoughts were in Spanish. Then, I would translate them into English when I spoke. But this time, English had come first. That morning, as I made my coffee, I tested myself. Could I go through the whole morning without translating? I tried thinking about my plans for the day. Instead of thinking in Spanish and then changing it into English, I just thought, "Today, I have class at 10. After that, I'll meet Matey for lunch." It felt natural. Not perfect, but natural. I realized something. I wasn't just learning English anymore. I was living in English. The changes didn't stop there. Every day, I noticed more and more moments where English felt like my first response. One day, I was walking through a bookstore when I saw a mystery novel on display. I picked it up, read the summary, and thought, "This looks interesting." I froze for a second. That thought had come in English without effort. without translation. Another time, I was at a coffee shop, waiting for my order. A woman next to me dropped her phone, and without thinking, I said, "Oh, here you go," as I picked it up for her. She smiled. "Thanks," I smiled back. No problem. It was such a normal, everyday moment, but inside, I was celebrating. I had spoken in English without hesitation, without fear. At home, I started watching TV shows without subtitles. At first, I missed some words, but I didn't pause or look them up. Instead, I just kept watching, letting my brain fill in the gaps. One evening, Matey and I were watching a comedy show. Something funny happened, and I laughed before I even had time to think about why. Matey turned to me, smiling. "You got that joke?" I nodded. "Yeah, it was funny." And it wasn't because I had translated it in my head. It was because I actually understood it. The biggest change was in my conversations. Before, I was always careful with my words. I would stop, think, translate, and then speak. But now, I was speaking without stopping so much. One night, Matey and I were cooking dinner together. She was telling me a story about her childhood, and I was laughing. At one point, I jumped in and said, "That reminds me of something funny that happened in my school." Matey smiled, but then she said, "Oh, you mean that reminds me?" I blinked. I had made a grammar mistake. A few months ago, I would have felt embarrassed. But now, I just nodded and repeated it. "Oh, that reminds me. Got it." Matey gave me a thumbs up. "You're getting so good at this, Georgia." And the crazy thing was, I knew she was right. The biggest shock came one night when I had a dream. In the dream, I was walking through the streets of London. I stopped at a cafe and ordered a coffee. The barista asked me something, and I answered. We talked for a while, laughing and chatting like old friends. And then, suddenly, I woke up. I sat up in bed, trying to remember the dream. What was strange about it? Why did it feel different? Then it hit me. The whole dream had been in English, not Spanish. Not a mix of both, just English. I sat there for a long time, thinking about it. I wasn't just learning English anymore. My brain was accepting it as part of my life. And that was when I truly knew. I wasn't translating in my head anymore. I was living in English. After that, I stopped thinking of English as something foreign. It wasn't just a subject I studied. It was part of me now. I didn't worry about sounding perfect. I didn't panic if I forgot a word. I didn't translate everything before I spoke. One day, I was sitting in a park, reading my book, when I got a phone call. It was my mom. I answered in Spanish, excited to tell her about my day. But as I spoke, I realized something. I was struggling to find the right Spanish words. I laughed. English had become so natural to me that now I had to think before speaking my own language. My mom laughed too. "Georgia, you're becoming a real Londoner." And maybe she was right, because in that moment, sitting in a park, speaking English every day, thinking in English, dreaming in English, I felt at home. The day I realized that English had become part of my life, everything changed. I was no longer afraid to speak. I didn't second-guess myself every time I opened my mouth. I didn't freeze when someone spoke too fast. But most importantly, I felt like myself in English. Before, English was something I was trying to learn. Now, it was something I lived. George's journey shows that learning English is not just about studying grammar or memorizing vocabulary. It's about living the language, embracing mistakes, and building confidence. If you're on the same journey, keep going. Speak every day. Push through the fear. One day, just like Georgia, you'll wake up and realize English is part of you now. And that will be the moment you truly succeed.